Welcome to another episode of Bill on Bikes. We're inside my facility, the Motorcycle Garage in Phoenix, Arizona. Here we have a 2003 Harley-Davidson VROD. It's getting a full 20K service, coolant flush, brake rebuild in the front calipers, valve adjustment, new tires. We're going to go through everything, get it done, and then send it off to the customer who lives in California and get him ready for a nice summer riding season. I'm going to show you some tips and tricks as we go along, especially with the valve adjustment, maybe the rebuild of the front calipers, the Hayes calipers, which it's very common to be able to pull the handle in all the way to the throttle grip. We're going to rebuild those, flush the dot 4. We're going to start with the front end, so we'll video that. We'll show you what that's like. We're going to rebuild the fork seals that are leaking, and we'll go from there. So make sure you like us on YouTube, Facebook. Any comments, send them out, whether you like them or not. If you want us, I always enjoy constructive criticism. If we need to make changes, and there's a couple guys that don't like the music, it's kind of hard with getting copyright strikes from YouTube, so I do my best to pick music that works, and we won't get those strikes. So anyway, follow us as we go along and go through this bike. Okay, we already have the left side rebuilt. I showed the disassembly of that. I already assembled it on the bike. I always do one side at a time, is not to relieve the tension on the neck bearings. So I want to keep that set. I will check the fall away once the front tire and everything is assembled. That's part of the service. I've already moved around the neck bearings. They feel good. So that's just one thing we do. Another thing, always tape the top cap. That way you won't put any marks in it at all. Everything's cleaned up. I always use the Harley seal kits, and I will pre-lube everything, all the seals with Harley seal grease. That's what it's meant for. I'll tell the owner as you go along, and as it's breaking in, yes, you will see some grease buildup on the tube. Just wipe it away, and that way the seals will break in really nice, and usually we won't end up with any leaks, and they'll even last longer. Check out the tube, make sure there's no nicks, scratches, anything that could cause a leak. This one looks pretty good. We have our new bushings here. We're going to pre-lube them. I always just use a little bit of the fork oil, pop it on the tube, and we're going to do the next one. This is the upper one, and we'll slide that down. They go 180 degrees opposite of each other, and you don't want to have them on the thrust face. So if I put them in like this, where you have this groove, right now, that's the thrust face of the tube of the lower slider. So you this side, and you'd have the back side and the front side, and you can actually wear a groove into the slider. So we want to make sure that these are on the sides. So you always want to make sure you do that. I'm going to slide in the dampener. The dampener spacer, which has already been cleaned, we'll put that in position. Again, we'll go side to side. We're going to set this inside here in the slider. And then what I like to do, we're temporarily going to put just the spring in here for a sec and the spacer, so don't worry about the washer yet. Bring this up. And then you have to make sure that the spacer is in the slider correctly. Usually you can hear it click in, which seems pretty good right there. And then I always use a little bit of silicone. In this case, I use a little bit of Harley crankcase sealant, which works great. I never have leaks. Just a dab on the bottom of the washer and on the top. Rotate it around, clean up any excess on the sides. Do a nice neat job, so we don't want to have any leaks. Just a little. All right, put this in position and we'll torque it to spec. What I like to do is put a screwdriver in that helps me support it as I'm torquing it. Push down on the tube to get some pressure on the dampener rod. There's our click. I just do it at least a couple times. All right. Now, make sure that was at 90 degrees, like that. Our new washer for the seal, sharp side up. You can see it as a press side where this edge is slightly rounded, sharp edge up. And in position like that, we're going to pull out the spacer and we're going to pull out, make sure the progressive winding on this particular tube always goes down. Some manufacturers like Progressive, they say you can go either way. Most of the time they will specify down. If it's down from the motor company, it's going to go down when we do it. We have our new seal, and we're going to put some seal grease in here. Not too much, just enough. And then on the outside we use a little bit of the fork oil. Now you got to make sure the garter spring here goes down. That faces in towards the tube. What's nice about these particular ones, they have a nice taper on the top, so if you gently just push it to one side and work it around, you won't damage the seal. And like that. Seal installer, which will set it to the correct depth. Just touch it down until it stops. We put our new ring in, our new snap ring. And I'm very gently, not to touch the tube. Make sure it's down in position. I've actually had these pop out before because they weren't installed correctly, so really want to pay attention and make sure it's in there correctly, which it is. Now we're going to put our dust shield on. I've already lubricated it. And then we use the opposite side of the tool for the dust shield, as not to damage it. And these ones you can kind of just push on. You don't really have to. Now I'm going to put the chrome cover. I like to line up the mark because usually even with a brass punch we'll get a small little mark. You can't really see it, but I line it up so it's in the same place every time. So the next guy comes along, kind of pre-line this up. Again, use the correct side. Tap this in position. All right, that is together. Now, make sure the tube's compressed. We're going to pour our fork oil in here. And the specified amount is we actually measure 3.3 inches from the top of the compressed tube with no spring or spacer installed. And you want to pump it up, get all the air out. Put some more oil in here. You can specifically measure the amount of oil you're using, but you're sucking it out anyway for the right amount, so I just find it easier to do it this way. You'll still hear some air in there. Make sure we get all the air out. That's pretty good. Now, we're going to put our syringe in here, which has already been preset. And we're going to suck out the excess oil. I'm going to have to do this a couple times. And there we go. So now we have the correct amount of oil. We'll install our spring, progressive wound down, the washer on top of the spring, and then our spacer. I like to always make sure that washer was flat, which it is. Now, what I do to protect the tube is I have an old inner tube that we mount on here, wrap this around. We have our Motion Pro vise, which is great for this application. You don't want to over torque this, just enough to hold it up as we're compressing the spring. And sometimes it's good to have an extra person to kind of help you with these. Some of these springs are so hard to push down because of the preload, but this one's not too bad. We're going to pop a new O-ring on here. It comes in the kit. And then I also always put a little seal grease on the threads and on the O-ring. That way I don't have any binding problems. Now, look how nasty that oil was, 20,000 miles. It just goes to show you how important it is to get your fork oil changed. It's pretty nasty. I know the newer bikes are 50,000 miles. A lot of the earlier ones were 10,000, 20,000. They kept changing the intervals over the years. Just take a look at your service manual for that year and it'll tell you what the mileage interval was. Okay. So I'm going to grab my little step stool here. This is always the fun part. Put a couple gloves on. And our fork cap tool. Don't forget the cap. Not going to work without that. All right. Get this pushed down here. I always keep one glove on the cap in case it decides to pop off. You don't want to cross thread these, so you got to be pretty careful. And that's it. I will torque this. The spec's 22 to 50 foot-pounds. I always torque these at 40. And then we're going to do the install. We're going to change the front tire. And then I'm going to rebuild the brakes. I'll show you a little bit of that. And that's it. And I just wanted to point something out. You'll notice when I'm done with the job, everything's measured. We measure the intrusion here at the upper tree to the top of the tube. We make sure everything goes back in the same place. That way when I put the windshield on, it'll go right in. There's no scratches in the tube. You'll get your bike back just as it was from the factory. A lot of times I see guys, they take and they twist these and they mark them all up. They don't use the wedge to spread the tree and they don't clean it prior to taking it apart. And I also will lube this up with a lot of either WD-40 or another type of silicone oil just to get in there so we can pull it out nice and neat without scratching it. And then clean everything. As we're putting it back together, there's no debris and there won't be anything that can cause a scratch to mar this front end. So it's pretty important, I think, to give a customer back a really nice representation of his motorcycle as it left the factory. And a lot of times you just don't get that. Everything's torqued correctly. So now we're going to move on to the front wheel, replace the front tire, and then we're going to rebuild these Hayes calipers, and I'm going to show you what's going on there.